Super Bowl 58 tonight, 49ers and Chiefs in the season of Swift. This is ESPN's Around the Horn. Today also, Connor's got a movie to show the gang, 2009 Greek drama Dogtooth by head coach Yorgos Lanthimos. We've got three judges for a total of 3 possible points. Kirk, what do you think we're going to see tonight? Is it going to be a blowout or another little big man in the bag for the Big C?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I really think the Greek secondary is really strong, and it's going to be a matter of controlling the line of scrimmage. We're going to have to see if Tony's large frame can really stand up against the wits of the Oklahoma City Thunder and Anthony Gomez. We'll see. It's going to be a tight one. I'm expecting a wire-to-wire, thriller.
Kirk, you said it, and that's why we love you. At the end of the day, it's all about the points on the board. We'll see how many yeses are coming out tonight. People are saying it's got incest and full frontal nudity. Is this a movie you'd like to have your roommate walk in on you watching, Tony? The word is yours.
Thank you, Connor. Yes, so I'm here on the ground here. People are excited. My fiance did walk in on me watching Dogtooth at some inopportune scenes. I had to explain the context of what we were watching, which may have made it even worse. I will say, though, that the Greek secondary is nothing to sneeze at, but really Yorgos has been underrated his whole career. He's one of the most slept-on filmmakers out there, and I think that the editing and the cinematography is going to put him over the top, but we'll see what happens. Should be an exciting one.
Okay, well, let's go to the tape on that. That's Kirk walking in on Tony watching Simon Killer. Tony goes for the mute button, but too late. Yowza. Back to football now. Mere half hour before kickoff in Vegas. Anthony, I've got to know, who have you got for tonight, and what's the spread?
I'm actually someone who thinks I only care about the commercials, and I have to say is that the commercials for the last 5 years are actually better than any commercial from any time beforehand. But that's just my take.
I just have to ask, Bill, how many times do you think we're going to see Taylor Swift's keyboard tonight? Is that the over/under is at 3.5 on ESPN bet?
That's a good question, Kirk. Guys, that's all the sports voice I have.
Slam the over on that, Kirk. Slam the over.
This is the 706 podcast, of course. We're doing 2009's Dogtooth. Yorgos Lanthimos, famous for The Lobster recently. Other big hits, blowing up big time. But this is kind of one of his first kind of breakout, kind of critically acclaimed, approved dramas. This is solely in Greek. It is different tone, I would say, different vibe. Certainly has this kind of indie drama vibe. I think we can talk a little bit about the general premise as we go. But I want to hear what are some first impressions, or I know Tony at least has seen it before. Let's go actually Anthony first.
Thank you, Connor. So, in watching Dogtooth, and in thinking about the other films, Yorgos, how do you say his last name?
Lanthimos.
Yeah, I'm never going to probably get it. So, but thinking about Yorgos' other movies, I still haven't seen Poor Things, but is it The Favorite and Killing of a Sacred Deer is 2 English films in addition to that. But thinking about Dogtooth in comparison and thinking about what Dogtooth represents before, what comes after, and thinking about the films that I want to almost instinctually compare it to, I have to say is that in this experience that I was left sort of underwhelmed by Dogtooth. And I think that has to come down to a couple of simple reactions, which is one, I don't find anything in Dogtooth particularly shocking. Nothing about it eviscerates any sort of emotional reaction, visceral or otherwise. And I don't particularly find anything intellectually stimulating about the situation of the children, the dad, or this kind of like a spin or update to almost a kind of Plato allegory of the cave-esque sort of scenario. What I find in the movie is kind of a touch of like this like Louis Bernal like surrealism, or maybe even absurdism might be a better way of putting it. But it never really embraces the kind of strangeness, I think, of the situation in a way that works for me, I should say, in a way that I would particularly want to see. And so, in kind of thinking about the movie, what I'm left with is a series of kind of moments that feel like Yorgos is simply thinking about how to stir a reaction and how to keep that kind of stirred reaction going. In thinking about the way these children learn about sexuality and thinking about the way the father's abuse sort of surrounds the house in the way they learn things from movies. What I'm left with are a series of impressions that I found by the end of the movie. I was asking, so what? So what am I supposed to do with all this material? And so what am I supposed to be left with? And I brought up the other movies he's done more recently, the ones I've seen, because they might be less impressive in a sense, less impressive in like a filmic, like what he's really aiming for or going for. But at the same time, I find like him trying to be a little bit more populist in especially Killing of a Sacred Deer, employing a kind of more straightforward horror narrative to this kind of subject matter, employing bigger actors, actors who bring personality to these kind of characters in a way that don't just feel like dolls moving in a house, leave something a bit more fun to be had in watching the movie. And I have to say, is like leaving the movie reminded me of Cachet all those years ago in the dorm when we first started that. A kind of series of coldness in a way that wasn't particularly invigorating, I should say. Not in a coldness that, of course, like this is what he was going for. I'm supposed to be left cold, but a coldness in a sort of, well, I guess I got through this. And part of me is now trying to wrap my head around what is so fascinating that Connor really wanted to get to this episode. What is something that Tony's going to be able to gravitate to and explain why I'm missing something crucial to this movie? And what did Kirk have to say as someone whose taste kind of varies and who is open but sometimes closed to these type of movies, or at least once was when we first started. So I'm in a position, maybe I should just sum up to say, is like I want to be convinced about this movie, but I don't necessarily know if the movie has the material to convince me of what so many others saw in it.
Gotcha. Well, thank you, Anthony. I think let's hear from Tony next.
Thanks, Connor. Yes, I've seen this movie once before. I watched it back in college, so a good number of years ago now. So I remembered certain, striking, visceral moments. Obviously, some of the rather graphic sex scenes and some of the kind of the ickier moments of the movie, the scene with the mouthwash, certain moments that kind of just really stuck with me. But I forgot kind of the thrust of the plot and kind of the direction the movie goes. I am sympathetic to a lot of Anthony's arguments. I think that this movie is it's very dry, it's very unadorned, intentionally so. It's very simplistic. I get more of a sort of a visceral reaction, more of an emotional reaction out of Killing of a Sacred Deer, which is by a good margin my favorite film of his still, even having seen Poor Things and seeing a number of his other movies. I don't know how common that view is, but that's just the one that really hit me in that way. In part, I think because it does kind of take this tone, take this purity, put it in almost in the kind of a horror movie context and kind of plays on those tropes, and I think in a very successful way. Whereas this movie is very bare bones, it's very minimalistic. However, I do think this movie still works on its own terms. I still find myself drawn in by this movie. I think that while again, and I often say this, while we can imagine a version of the movie that maybe is a little bit more technically flashy or more, I don't know, emotionally hot-blooded, that's a fundamentally different movie, and it's not Dogtooth anymore. And I think that what works for me about it is I think he has a really great control of tone, and I think that's a through line through all his films. He has a very strong sense of what he wants you to be feeling at a given scene in a given moment. And I think here, kind of the bag of tricks is pretty like, if you watch a lot of like European movies that have like played in Cannes over the past 20 years or so, it's pretty familiar formally, a lot of long static shots, a lot of understated performances, some, uncomfortable subject matter. Like, I think it's very much in the tradition of Haneke. I think Cachet is a good kind of point of comparison. And I think like Haneke and like Cachet, he's trying to do sort of a social commentary here in this very dry sort of way. I think this movie's kind of about states and the way that the relationship between the individual and the state, and the way, we are given sort of a context that can form the sort of personalities we're kind of permitted to develop, which is kind of an interesting kind of thematic sandbox to play in a little bit. But I think what draws me into this movie, just moment to moment, in terms of like an entertainment value, is the way, just the subtle rhythms of kind of the plot, the way the characters interact, the way things kind of progress and eventually resolve, the way things are kind of subtly introduced and then brought back. The idea of the cat being because basically this world that the dad is constructing, he's kind of making up as he goes along with the mom. They're getting these tapes every day with the definitions of various words, and they're new words. So this world is being crafted kind of little by little. And I think what's interesting too about the tapes and the way the movie opens with, we're hearing the words today are C, carbine. I don't remember all the words, but C is the first word you hear. And then we hear that a C is a leather chair. So it kind of creates this sort of expectation as an audience member where we can't trust what we're seeing. And when characters are speaking to one another, we can't really trust what we're hearing. Our definitions, our context that we're bringing to the movie is not going to really apply. So it puts us in this kind of unstable position. And I think the way that these things are introduced and then brought back later, sometimes with, for instance, we've already joked about the keyboard line, you licked my keyboard. It creates moments of kind of unexpected comedy, but also then you get a scene late in the film where one of the daughters is licking her father on the cheek in order to get something from him. And this is sort of something we've seen earlier in the movie, how she like got this idea. And I think there's a lot of little things like that, as well, just the glimpses you get of the father, like at his workplace. And there's just a lot of little interesting details in this movie that create this kind of unique world. And I think that for like an early film, as kind of an exercise, I think it's pretty successful. So while I don't love this movie in the way I love Killing of a Sacred Deer, for example, I definitely like appreciate it. And I think that a second watch, I got more out of it. I enjoyed it more than my first watch, I would say.
Thank you, Tony. Okay. And let's hear from Kirk.
Yeah, hey, so I don't know. I oscillated back and forth between indifference, some apathy, as Anthony described, but also an intrigue and real interest in the well-being, the moment-to-moment conscious experience of the three children. I think one thing that definitely stands out to me is that this movie is well acted, and it really depends upon the good performances of the three leads, especially I don't know, do we ever hear their names?
No, we don't.
No,
We just
okay.
know
So
the older sister's called the eldest.
yeah, the eldest, she's obviously meant to be kind of the focal point, and she's really great as as an actor and also as a character. Yeah, it took me a while to kind of get into the rhythm of what Yorgos was trying to do here. Once you kind of slid into that rhythm, it felt novel. It felt fresh, interesting, and there were definitely some really, I don't know, unexpected notes that only continues to like foster a sense of unease and dissonance when you're watching. And I appreciate that. I don't think it went too far. I'm usually one to criticize like art house films. I had a very poor reaction to Cachet. I know Anthony mentioned Cachet. I feel like this movie was more cohesive than Cachet. So take that with a grain of salt. Maybe this is a more accessible film, or maybe it just, the specific kind of themes are very interesting to me. Kind of the inculcation of a family, of a nuclear unit, through brainwashing and, kind of a psychological torture almost. It was very, very interesting. I wish there would have been a little bit more of an exploration as to why the father is acting this way. He seems pretty well adjusted at work. Also, the people, I think we only see two outside characters for the whole movie, Christina, and then who may be the father's boss, the gentleman who's trying to pick out floor tiles. Both of them seem rather weird too. I don't know if this is like, just this is the way the world is. There wasn't as much of a contrast between quote unquote normalcy or sanity or like the real world and this fabricated world that the father and mother have created. Though I'm not sure how culpable the mother is. It seems like the father's running the show and she's kind of reeling from some undefined trauma or some horrible thing in her past that maybe she's the mastermind. I'm not really sure, but it's definitely an interesting dynamic. There is a little bit of just shock value for the sake of simplicity, and yeah, we find very often throughout the movie like that things are happening maybe not because they're the best for the overall arc of the story, but because they may be provocative at times, and you wonder about that, and you wonder if Yorgos kind of goes back to the well too many times with the explicit sex scenes, and I don't know. It's like what is this serving, right? What is this serving to see these different manifestations of sexual intercourse, aside from just kind of shocking us or disgusting us, or is it highlighting in some way the brothers' kind of intrapsychic world? I don't think so. I don't think there's anything we're learning about any of the characters, except for the end. We're obviously learning that the eldest does not like what she's experiencing, which she probably doesn't even know how to define it or what it's for or what it means. And when she's effectively, raped is, I don't know what word you would use. She's coerced into sex with the brother. And that seems to be the catalyst to her wanting to leave. Well, in addition to the fact that she saw Rocky and Jaws on VHS, that's another thing. I think like when you are in the situation, I believe the father did a really great job of kind of, he hit all the notes of what you would want to do if you're trying to really just incapacitate somebody mentally and psychologically, and you're trying to create a world for them to reside in outside of the bounds of normalcy. But I do think that the kind of the constructs that he helped to create would have been strong enough to endure seeing, two VHS films. I think he would have had enough plausible deniability to kind of work through that, to explain away whatever she saw. I don't think it would have triggered something so big. Maybe that could have happened with like an unexpected visitor or like, like a mailman or a delivery guy. I think that would have been even more intriguing, seeing one of the children talk to somebody from the outside world and seeing that interaction, I think would have been really kind of fun, but we didn't get that. So by no means a perfect movie, very, very novel, very creative. I do appreciate the level of creativity on display. It's a little rough at times, a little raw. I think there is just an element of showiness that doesn't always have to be there. It can make being a little more discerning or a little more reserved can make those really crucial moments more affecting. But he went for it, and you have to respect that. So that's kind of my initial impression.
Thanks, Kirk, and thanks everybody. Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting things to think about here. I'm going to try to kind of give a little bit of the premise. I think if you're watching this, hopefully you've watched or at least read a little bit about the movie, what it's about. But introduce kind of how I think about it or what's interesting about it to me. It's this idea of coming to understand what the premise is, what is going on, right? We see this family, this domestic scene. Immediately, we're hit with this uncanniness. Obviously, why are we listening to a tape of words being defined? But as soon as we hear, yes, the sea is a leather armchair, there's this kind of violent shock, this uncanniness to that to me like suffuses the whole movie, that like never left me, especially when I first watched it. There's just something so fascinating about this. There's a mystery to it. I think that's one of the reasons why we keep watching. I think interesting. I mean, the question of like boredom is an interesting thing because of course this movie does kind of hold you at a distance. The tone is a lot more dry and kind of as Tony pointed out, kind of Kansy. It's very like there's a similar tone in a lot of like sort of independent dramas in the past, like, 10 years, 20 years, right? It's a tone that we've seen before that maybe a little bit, in kind of the setting and the feel and the stripped down feel of it, maybe again, kind of a factor of like limitations. We've seen Yorgos's, Lanthimos's more recent movies, a little bit more lavish sets and environments, and maybe there was an element of limitation to this movie. I mean, to me, I think it's actually what seems like a limitation makes the ideas that are there so much stronger, right? The uncanniness of like it is a very mundane picture that we're getting of a very, very abnormal and unsettling situation. And I think there's all these elements that are there we see in his other movies. There's kind of this like deadpan dialogue, which sometimes verges on like kind of dark humor a lot of the time. And I think he leans into that more in his more recent movies. There is certainly an element of shock, of things that may be considered disgusting, horrifying, uncomfortable. That is another theme that runs through. I think there's something about the way that we discover, the way we experience that shock, the way it kind of unfolds in front of us about this movie that makes it very, very interesting. And I think kind of the puzzle of this movie is, how do you make a movie about this subject taking place only in this house? How can you make that kind of scenario interesting? And of course, it is this kind of nightmare version of a family, right? I think there's some questions about like kind of what is the kind of the conclusion of the movie, like how does these things develop? Obviously we have one character. I mean, another thing that I find really fascinating about what makes it kind of very like powerful to watch is it is this kind of strange power trip. It is this weird thing to think about how much control, for instance, like parents have over children. If they don't let them leave the house, obviously they do let them leave the house in most cases, but the idea of the power of just being able to arbitrarily define things, the idea of having control over someone's education and development. This is the theme of the dog that comes up throughout the movie. This idea of control, which is kind of this idea of power. And I don't mean to, I think we could talk a little bit about, where we think that's going kind of theme wise, but I think it just is something inherent in the way the movie presents itself, the way the movie unfolds, as we ourselves think about how much power do these people have in this situation. And of course, how will the children, the three kids, how will they escape, and one does eventually. Oh, one thing just before I forget, I should have mentioned this at the very beginning, but I don't mean to give short shrift to Efthymis Philippou, who is one of the writers who's co-written with Yorgos Lanthimos on his other movies, except for Poor Things. But okay, I want to turn it back a little bit to Tony. I think everyone has something that we could address, but I do want to turn it back a little bit to Tony on kind of getting towards like a thematic reading. Tony, you mentioned for you, it's like the States. What did you take away? What kind of thoughts are running through your head? Obviously you've had a second chance to watch this, or at least a second chance. So you've had some time to kind of cook a little bit, vis-a-vis your kind of thematic reading, but what were you making of this?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of little things that are like that. Like, I think that a big part of the movie is like you said, defining words and defining concepts, right? And the concepts we absorb, the concepts we, I guess, buy into, defines our reality, right? And I think it's about, in a way, the way I guess any sort of social organization, any kind of hierarchical social organization, which has this power, can control your reality, even if you're not literally, I mean, you have places like, North Korea, for example, it's kind of a one-to-one analogy where, they literally will say, this word means this, and will prevent you from getting outside information about other countries, and you're not allowed to leave and so forth. But I think in a metaphorical sense, that's true of every society on earth, where that has a powerful centralized authority. You're given, it's like the whole like manufacturing consent concept. That's a pretty, I think, pervasive thing. And basically the vocabulary we use to describe the world and things happening in the world is the vocabulary that we're provided. whether it's by social media algorithms or mainstream media organizations and so forth. Not trying to sound like a conspiracy theorist here, but I think this is just the way the world operates. And I think this movie takes that concept and puts it into this very stark, very in the context of the nuclear family, kind of the most basic societal unit, and shows the way that this can be done and makes it kind of grotesque by putting it in this context. This thing that we kind of passively accept in our lives is made horrifying by putting it in this context where it's kind of obscene, where the relationship between the parent and child, between brother and sister, and so forth, is made horrible by the nature of this control, the nature of this shaping of reality. And I think that a crucial point is that even throughout the movie, their isolation is somewhat self-imposed, or not self-imposed, but they are physically capable of escaping. They are physically capable. We see the scene with the airplane outside of the gates, and the father has to back up his car 5 feet to pick it up and so forth. I think too, that's the point of the ending, where the last shot of the movie is just the trunk of the car, right? She hasn't actually escaped. Even if she does get out of that trunk, even if she tries to take part in larger society, the damage has been done, which is shown by the fact that she, buys into the whole idea of the Dogtooth itself, that she, rather than just sneak out at night after she has this horrible traumatic experience, she has to self-harm essentially to remove the Dogtooth so that she's now old enough to escape. So those concepts and that brainwashing persists, which is a pretty banal observation, I guess. But I think that's kind of the point. The point of it is that our reality is something that is kind of bestowed upon us, and I think the movie is very pessimistic in terms of our ability to escape that reality.
That's a good point, Tony. Yeah, that she doesn't really escape in the end, and I think you are kind of trapped in that. And that to me again is kind of like, there's an element to me, I think maybe most fundamentally this movie is kind of like whatever we can say about the themes is a bit of commentary. I think it is that, and I think I have my own kind of reading. It's a bit more like prosaic, but I think that kind of that distortion, that sense of the malleability of our views and how we can potentially be unable to escape that is really interesting. Kirk, are you available to speak right now? I see you're outside. But I just wanted to ask you, Kirk, were you a bit skeptical of that totalizing reading? You think it's worth like that kind of reading, that much into this movie? Did you have any reactions to what Tony was saying vis-a-vis like this larger theme, or is it just not even really of issue to you?
So the larger theme of just our reality is constructed for us by others, and we're merely kind of actors on a stage of a world that is heavily manipulated and artificial, something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
And arbitrary.
Yeah.
Right. I think Yorgos tries to draw out the rather arbitrary nature of what we're seeing. It's almost as though he picked certain things out of a hat, which I think just adds to the overall sense of unease, because it does remind us that after all, the word chair or the word carbine could really just as easily be defined differently, right? And what's stopping us from crossing those lines is each other. And so, I think really what's defined in this movie is the relationship between the siblings and how they reinforce or push against the reality of, or the experiences of the other two. Especially, there's one child who's like, I don't know, a doctor, a de facto doctor. She studied a lot of anatomical textbooks. The son is apparently a master guitar player, but he only knows one song, it seems, which is kind of funny. But he can play that song really well. And then the eldest, I'm not sure what her skill is per se. She's kind of just floating along a little bit. But it's curious to see how, one pinprick in the bubble, right, of this larger, creation can really cause distress and angst and internal strife within the three, especially the two sisters. I do like the scenes where they're just kind of by themselves and they're talking about, licking as a reward, or they're talking about the effect of anesthetics, and they both kind of huff some chloroform or whatever that might be. It's really interesting to me to see them just kind of mediate each other's existences, right? What is reality? Well, it's agreed upon by my sister, so it's good enough for me. And I think that even it's a more tenuous reality to maintain, but it's made all the more stronger by those social connections, by that social web, right? And even little things. I think the writing is very meticulous. Even little things like when they're blindfolded and they're trying to find the mother. She's counting, but you can tell her counting is off because she says like 4 minutes, 30 seconds. And then, 12, 13 seconds later, she says 5 minutes, 15 seconds. And it's just those little things to throw off any sense of objectivity or, kind of permanence from one moment to the next that really, really aid in this feeling of dislocation. And I think if this movie were made for like an only child, right? How interesting would that be? It feels like it would be so easy, relatively easy to kind of sufficiently and comprehensively brainwash, an only child. And so I think when you have three different personalities, three different temperaments, and then the different genders as well, and their needs and their kind of understanding of gender roles or sexuality. I like the idea that the eldest learns about licking or cunnilingus, right, through an outsider, an interloper, but she doesn't understand the sexual value of it. So she wants the pleasure of the licking. The perceived pleasure is just kind of the fact that a tongue is, soft and moist, right? And so she bargains with her sister to lick her on her shoulder because that's just as, good a place to have licked as your vagina, I guess. It's that kind of idea I think is really, really sustains the film, right? And, my big critique is just with how it progresses so quickly toward the end. I feel like that would take a long time and take many walls to break down, psychological walls and barriers. But I think Tony's right. I think I go back to the network, to the clan, right, to the tribe, and how we are our own kind of hall monitors in this sense. Like we all keep each other in check, and I think the children did that just as much in this film. So that aspect of kind of like going a little bit further with what Tony was saying, or a little bit more specific, I'm intrigued by that notion, but curious what Anthony has to say.
I'm really curious about that too. I think that's just, Anthony, would you like to weigh in on that and jump in on that point?
Or no, do you want to throw out your thing first?
No. I was just going to kind of just underline what Kirk was saying, but please, Anthony, go ahead.
Sure. So, well, before I forget, I guess there are two interesting things I was thinking about. One is the lobster side note, which is, I feel like, the forgotten Yorgos film. I remember like everybody loving it at the time, and I don't know what its reception is now, but it's surprising that no one brought it up here. And two, when the movie tapes start coming in, the videotapes start coming in at the end of the Dogtooth, I kept thinking about the movie The Wolf Pack. Do you remember the documentary about the children who were like locked up in the Lower East Side and only learned about the world through movies? I kept thinking of that as a parallel for Dogtooth. And I don't know what to do with that yet. But I think one thing in thinking about what Tony was saying with the idea of reality and what Kirk was getting at is there's also a question and a critique of standard education. The fact is, the beginning of the film, they get like rewards of like stickers, which feels like a parody of like a first grade classroom. And so I think there's also in the sense of like you determine the reality based on the factors around you, but also the inability to question it plays a huge and significant role. And without the ability to question it and without the ability to follow up on those questions, you're left with only kind of a surreal, nonsensical world in which you have no mores culturally, ethically, and in some ways morally. And if you even know or are aware of the outer world out there, you wouldn't want to go out there to begin with. How do you make sense of something if you have no way to make sense of your own interior world? Maybe that's like a very generous way of thinking about it, though, because I don't really fully get what Tony and Kirk are saying in the movie itself. I find this conversation more interesting than what seems to be supplied with its scenes and its talking points. So that's just me.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's complicated. I mean, it's a whole set of things, but I think what Kirk was getting at with this licking, which kind of is sort of the central plot thread of the movie, right? Otherwise, not much really is going on. There's a lot of kind of little vignettes and scenes. There's the case of the brother, this imaginary brother who lives outside of the house. We learn that apparently the parents, whenever they want, they can, say that they're going to have more kids who perhaps, are in the house or are outside of the house. But I think, right, there's this intrusion of this outsider who is brought in and who, yes, kind of introduces this idea. And of course, it's like the innocence of these characters that they can't innocence in a sense, but not innocence, because what we learn is kind of, I think that like fundamentally this idea of performing cunnilingus, right, is this kind of this expression of power, or licking at all, right, is this expression of kind of subservience, right, as it's framed in the movie. I'm not saying that is the case necessarily, okay, but as it's framed in the movie, right, and also this kind of this dog-like pose that we see that the characters are even framed in. I think what's a little bit scary, what's a little complicated, is on the one hand, though, our characters are innocent. On the other hand, they're also kind of they do participate. They have their own will to kind of to exert dominance over the other people in that nuclear family. I think of the scene with I just love the scene with the brother or son, however you want to think, the real son, because there's also an imaginary son. Well, I guess he's speaking to his brother ostensibly, but he's just expressing this idea that perhaps he can't express to the face of his other siblings, I'm better than you, like I wash the car better than you. This kind of just selfishness of just wanting to just be better, to be recognized even just a slight bit, no matter how low the stakes are. There's this slight desire to be higher on the totem pole in a sense, which kind of coexists with also this kind of the solidarity and this connection of the characters. But I do think, to me, another thing that's very compelling, I think we can spin a lot of like commentary on this. I think I would just say it's a critique of the nuclear family, of the other things that I think that Anthony and Tony both brought up, like this idea of like it could be reflect larger kind of social groups that we live in. To me, I do feel it's kind of this idea of like the preserve of the nuclear family, the suburban house with the pool, this kind of bourgeois idea of the family. And I think, again, there's some kind of a little bit of class commentary going on with the power that the father has as this kind of paterfamilias, but also as the kind of the employer of Christina, this guard who is used as kind of like to play the function of having this sex with the son, right? There's this kind of this perverse domination that occurs there. So I think there's something, again, I think it's not so much about like, we've realized this and recognized that it's bad to be dominant, but it's just kind of, it's seeing these dynamics play out in this kind of surreal environment, in this not surreal environment, but kind of mundane environment that has a surreal kind of focus and a surreal actions happening within it. Sorry, that was not very well put. But I think what's so compelling about this movie to me is also just seeing, I think there's something very simple about what makes it interesting to watch is just the simple fact of these probably 20-something-year-old, maybe early 20s, maybe late teens, early 20s people who we can only see as kids. They appear like kids to us. I mean, obviously they behave as kids. And there's kind of a surreal quality to that to me just never is constantly compelling and interesting. I guess, I don't know. what that is to say, but I do think, like, to me, there's more so than a lot of his other movies with very big Hollywood actors, and he does hire a lot of like the biggest name, actors who's played in his movies. More recently, I think just the performances in this movie are just so fascinating. There's just so much to these performances. I was curious if, just as maybe kind of a final point of discussion, if there's anything that stuck out to you guys in terms of the performances in this movie, the acting in this movie, any moments of acting that you liked, or anything along those lines.
There are two that come to mind for me. The one is during the scene where he says, "Do you want to hear your grandfather sing for you?" And he plays, I don't know, is it Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin? It's one of the
Yeah.
Rat Pack guys.
Climbing to the Moon by Frank
Yeah.
Sinatra.
Bruno
I should
Mars.
know. A bad Italian. I should have known right away. But he's kind of reading the lyrics to them as he's singing, as their fictional grandpa singing. But you see this look of just pure joy on the faces of the children, where this is like this is like this really special moment for them. Which I think is great. I mean, it's great acting, of course, but there's also just like, I think that one thing that I didn't talk enough about, or we maybe didn't discuss enough, is this. I think this movie is quite funny at times. That's a very funny scene, and then the whole bit with the brother, I think, is hysterical. When he goes to the trouble of covering himself in blood, and the bit with the cat. That's kind of what I was referring to earlier, with the way things kind of come back, where they establish that this bit of lore that cats are the most dangerous animals on earth, and then he immediately uses it to kill off the brother. And to see that, that's just great stuff. And then too, the really uncomfortable, prolonged incest scene towards the end of the movie, or in the aftermath, she says, like, "You ever do that again, I'm kicking you out of this town," or something, or she's using a line she saw on one of those videotypes. And then the son is just this look, this dead-eyed look, where there's no communication happening here. I think is like a pretty like unsettling moment. But really, there's every scene has like at least one or two moments that's like really like striking from an acting point of view, I think.
Yeah, I don't know if, I get, we're talking about kind of Tony's perspective. I don't think kind of animal torture and incest are that funny, but that's just my opinion. And to each their own, Tony, to each their own. But just kidding. So I think the acting is really great. It's uncomfortable because not only are you seeing these characters doing some of these things, but the actors actually have to do them as well. Like he has to drink. It's a small thing, but the son has to drink 2 glasses of orange juice in one cut. Like, that's not exactly comfortable to do. Most movies, they'll have somebody like put some food in their mouth and they'll cut away, and then I just like that he's asking a lot of the actors. I don't know if did they actually have sex at the end. Like, you see his dick, so that's a plant, that's a prop, and his real dick is like inside the prop.
I have to assume they put a bag on it or something, or they did some kind of trickery. It's very rare to have unsimulated sex in movies. There's only a handful I can think of. I don't think they were having sex.
Oh, do tell us.
What are they, Tony?
Short Bus is known for having unsimulated sex. I've not actually seen it. I just know that's like what it's known for. But basically, never. You see
down, Tony. Yeah.
One of my interests actually on Hinge was how you can put interests, and one of mine was unsimulated sex. So it's big right now, especially in like the East Village. But no, I think it's just there's a relationship you can see between the director and the cast, and you can see that this cast is really putting it all on the line. They're not holding anything back, at least the children, and I think that's really compelling. So, and just the overall sense of like, it's almost as though they appeared to be drugged, right? And I think that really is a testament to the acting on display, because I don't know if that's intentional, right? Is there some sort of pharmaceutical assistance going on that's maintaining this illusion? But they always seem as though they just woke up and they're kind of readjusting their perspective to the day's reality. So I appreciated the acting. I think it really did carry some of the slower moments of the film.
It reminds me of the acting in like a Wes Anderson film though, where like at times I wonder, or it's like it's obviously some degree of talent and skill, of course, and you know the casting people choosing the right individuals to fulfill these sort of like roles. But how much of it is the stylization of the filmmaking versus what they're bringing to the table? Now, I really appreciate their willingness to go there. But I do wonder if there's a disconnect at times or what the connective sort of tissue is between these sort of things. But I would agree with Tony. I do love the funeral scene and the commitment of the dad, although there's some amazing anti-cat propaganda happening in this film.
Yes, this one's a tough one for the kids. There's a rather devastating scene where a cat is attacked with garden shears. Very disturbing, obviously. Part of the shock. The cat, didn't do anything wrong at all. It's just the perverse upbringing of these kids. But okay, guys, just sorry. Last note on acting, and then we'll move on to voting, and we'll keep it rather short. But yeah, just one performance I especially value in this movie is Mary Tony, who plays the youngest sister, whose performance, she's kind of the know-it-all one, and a little bit more innocent than the older sister, who's the kind of more of the badass, who's trying to escape, trying to get away, much more adversarial. Mary Tony very sadly died in 2017. I just think, like, I don't know. It struck me as I found this out, that I thought it was just an amazing performance. And again, I think for her that she just so nailed, like, and she wasn't actually a professional actor. She was like apparently a singer in a punk band. But she really just kind of nailed this performance of just this childlike delivery. And I don't find it like, I think Yorgos's other movies like verge into the Wes Anderson-y zone, but I think these performances, I think, in this movie are just different. I don't know what it is exactly about it, how they were directed differently, but there's something about it that feels just more of just innocence, bluntness, straightforwardness than kind of just the kind of the Wes Anderson style kind of clipped, kind of quirky dialogue. Though sometimes that does happen in Lanthimos movies. But anyway, okay, guys. Let's just do a quick voting. I'm not expecting any like groundbreaking, changes in people's opinion, but let's go around. I guess we'll start with the original order. Let's go, Anthony.
Well, actually, no. I got to say no, Connor. It's like one of those things where you try to bring yourself to it, or you try to see it, and it's like I could see the pieces there. It just didn't quite come together for me in the way I think you were putting it out there.
Fair enough. That's tough, but okay. Let's go for Tony.
Yeah, well, first of all, I had no idea that she had passed away. That's very sad. But I will say yes. I think this is a very interesting, I think this movie, like the father himself, creates this kind of weird little world that's like very fascinating. And I'm glad I watched it again.
Nice. Okay. To break the tie, let's go, Kirk, for the field goal.
Yeah, I will say, right. I will say that, one of the metrics I use often is this movie something that's enjoyable to watch? This movie isn't enjoyable to watch. Would I ever watch this movie again? Probably not. I feel like which is fine. It's just one consideration. So I feel like that docks it down a little bit for me, but art doesn't have to be enjoyable. Art doesn't have to kind of accommodate you. And so I recognize that as well. I will give it yes. It's one of those ones where I have to remind myself that 706 movies is a shitload of movies. And I feel like this has to be on there. So it's if I were to say where it is, it's probably in like 400 or 500 range. But that's still good. It's still one of the 706 best, and I appreciate it. Yeah, good call.
Thanks, Kirk. Gets in on a technicality. It must be pretty good. It's soft, yes. I think that feels about right. I mean, I think this movie is fascinating. I think I can agree with the general critiques that is it a movie I really what I would want to return to it after this? I mean, I think it is one of those movies I would think if it doesn't grip you on the first watch, is it worth revisiting? But I still think I wish I could make a good case comparing it to other Lanthimos movies why it's still it's a uniquely strong part of his filmography. But okay, let's move to the fan favorite segment. You guys suggest a movie. I choose which one we're going to watch for next time. Let's see who went least recently. Usually, I'm totally useless on this question.
I think it was Kirk because 99 was the Halloween episode, and then 100 was the vinyl, and then 101 was Frailty. So I think it is Kirk.
The last time I went, we were still wearing masks and talking about, COVID. So I think I need a post-pandemic episode. I will choose the order. I will go first. Last week, I opted to go third, and it bit me in the ass because Anthony took my decade, or Connor took my decade, excuse me. So I'll go first. Tony, you can go second, and Anthony can go last. So my movie is one I'm sure we've all seen, and I don't recall if one of us has nominated it, but I think it's worth a watch. And that would be 2012's Place Beyond the Pines with Ryan Gosling, Bradley Cooper, Eva Mendes, directed by Derek Cianfrance. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but he was, he's been involved with some other films, ones that I've liked, like Sound of Metal. And so I'm curious to see what we'd make of this. I think it's really fascinating to watch a movie take place in two kind of distinct eras, to have such a jarring transition between one act of the movie and another. How generational trauma is transmitted, how we rise or fall or stumble in terms of social capital and social status. So I think this movie is very fascinating. It's definitely something with some meat on the bones and well acted, of course. So
sounds like a Kirk, and I loved Sound of Metal, so I'm intrigued. Okay, let's hear from Tony. I believe you said that right, Kirk?
Yeah, Tony and then Anthony.
Okay. This is tough. I don't have one really ready to go, but you know what? Screw it. Let's pull out the good stuff. Let's pull out the 12-year scotch here. I'm thinking Mulholland Drive, David Lynch. We got to do another David Lynch movie. It's been too long. I'm glad we did Blue Velvet, but it's Mulholland Drive, man. It's Mulholland Drive. I mean, I want to do Eraserhead. I want to do Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, but this is just the one I'm feeling right now, and I think we'd get a really good discussion out of it.
Coming out with the big guns. All right, a little Lynch situation. Definitely not holding back, Tony. Let's hear from Anthony.
Yeah, Tony is not holding back, but that's good because I was also thinking about the big holes, the big gaps. There's one person I was thinking of is like huge in film like history, but you never hear his name as much anymore. You never hear like younger people talk about it. And I don't know if any of us have ever talked about it to each other individually or the group at some point. But I was thinking about Fellini. And so the one I was going to nominate is 1973's Amarcord, which is one I have a soft spot for. It's not necessarily one that people would rank in like the top like 3 or 4 of his movies, which would probably be like La Dolce Vita or La Strada or something. But Amarcord is the movie he makes when he decides to like look back and examine his childhood. It's also his like embracement of color, which you never really see him do like so well ever again. I think it's what most people would consider his last kind of major work for a while. But there's just something about the movie that I think is really charming, funny, and like really inventive in a Terry Gilliam almost way. And so, yeah, I think it'd be kind of cool to talk about Amarcord from Fellini, 1973.
All very, very interesting. That's definitely the classic, the cineast pick. Let's see. I'm not sure where I'm leaning right now. I could go in lots of different directions. I will admit that I have a little bit of a Fellini problem in that I really tried in my like early film getting into film years. I tried really hard to watch Eight and a Half. I tried to watch it probably around 3 or 4 times, and I fell asleep every single time, which was the point, of course, because it's so dreamlike. Anyway, so there's a little bit. Anthony's gonna have to make a case. He already made an interesting case, like with the Gilliam connection there, with the tonal element. But I need to hear some more points for why your movie is the next one to try out for the 706. How about Kirk? Let's hear it.
All right. Yeah. I mean, Bellinis are fine. I actually like screwdrivers. I think they're just a little stronger when you're craving something that early in the morning. And then it appears that Tony didn't get enough female licking. He wants some more. Tony, this might be a you thing. You can take care of this on your own time. I don't know if you have to bring us into it. But no, Place Beyond the Pines. Is it Place Beyond or Place Between? It shows no Place Beyond. I thought it might be Place Between for a second. It's Connor, have you seen it? Wow. Okay. It's a really interesting movie. It's not one that's easily pigeonholed, which I think is a strength of it. You know, Ryan Gosling, this is kind of, I think, in between The Notebook and La La Land, like right in the middle almost. And it's where his career is kind of taking a turn for something a little bit more substantive. And so I think that's an interesting through line here. Like I said, basically the movie is about two sets of families, or specifically two men who they interact in one capacity. Something very monumental happens, and then we fast forward maybe 15, 20 years to see the resolution, see how those ghosts come back to kind of haunt the present day. The cinematics are very striking, the visuals, and I think if I recall correctly, there's just a certain grittiness to it, almost that felt so novel that I think a lot of films have tried to replicate since. This is where we're moving away from some of the surrealism and into the kind of the grit that can really sustain a film that deals with some very somber subjects and touches some kind of mordant notes. So I appreciate it. I think the fact that you haven't seen it, Connor, I do think you need to see it eventually. I would say, yeah, the other two movies are likely rated higher by many metrics, but that's not the only consideration. It's what you're in the mood for. It's what would be a good episode for us. I think this would be a great episode, actually. So I'm curious what the others will say.
All right. Well, Tony, making a case for Mulholland Drive. Let's see how you do here.
Okay, this is tough. I did see Place Beyond the Pines like forever ago, like I think right after it came out on Blu-ray. I remember liking it. One note on it for Connor, of interest to Connor, there was a tweet from one Film Crit Hulk who said that movie makes every wrong choice. So maybe that'll make you want to see it more, maybe less, I don't know. But I did remember liking it, but it's been a very long time. But I remember it's good. I do need to see more Fellini. I've not seen that particular film. I think Mulholland Drive it's a recent-ish movie, but it's not too recent. I think David Lynch, it's time to go back to the Lynch well. I think there's no shortage of angles to explore with that movie. And I think it's just like it's a movie you can, quote unquote solve, but it's also solving. It's almost beside the point. It's just about the experience. And every time you watch the movie, you can have kind of a different experience. It's a really one of a kind, kind of cinematic experience. And I think it's fits right in with our podcast canon.
Okay. You made a case. Obviously, it's a standout in terms of, well, I guess no, Place Beyond the Pines is also a very well-known, well-regarded movie. So just for me, I've seen Mulholland Drive, so I know a bit about it. I think I know, where that conversation might go. But how about Anthony making his case for a movie that I'm not familiar with at all? I'm Record.
Yeah. Tony, did I see The Place Beyond the Pines with you? Was that in the dorm?
I remember watching it at home. I rented it from Blockbuster and watched it with my mom. So I don't think we
Okay. Okay, well, I remember watching it in the dorm at some point. Very cool, very interesting movie, Connor, Place Beyond the Pines. And there's something about doing two of Derek Sion Francis films in this group that we're building. So I got to say that. But Tony's movie doesn't need more of a defense. I saw it for the very first time with him. I do remember that at the IFC, and it holds up. I'm always happy to rewatch and rediscuss it. It's just like a perfect film and a perfect movie. Amarcord, I'd have to say, is not. It's a flawed movie, and it has some of the trappings that Fellini probably gives in to in a lot of his other stuff. I'd have to agree with you, Connor. I don't necessarily find him that compelling in things like 8.5 or La Strada, which I first tried to watch when I was like 20. And they kind of bored and they kind of didn't really do anything for me, although I'm starting to come around. Amarcord, though, which is kind of a plotless film about a boy in this town, is, I think, a very funny, accessible way to kind of understanding what may be charming about him as a filmmaker and understanding a kind of use of dreams and a use of the imagination as a combating of a kind of Italian fascism that he's kind of thinking about in his childhood. And the use of course, cinema and its kind of wonders like the circus that he brings in as a kind of compelling counter argument to some of the things you've talked about today, governance, control, and so forth. And so if anyone were to watch any of Fellini's and I were to say you don't care about the canon of his films, but you want to understand who he is, I might show Amarcord. Actually, I probably would. So that would be my pitch for it. But I'd be very happy with the other two.
I'm just imagining the most European kind of whimsical kind of Amelie meets Jojo Rabbit meets Hugo, kind of just this the miracle of movies and imagination, and which is maybe what I need from Fellini that would be not hold me at a distance in the same way as other classics. Okay, this is tough. I am definitely at a loss. It's going to be coming down to the wire here. Okay, probably Amarcord would be like the homework pick, like the one I kind of should watch because I really should give Fellini another chance. Actually, Anthony's kind of getting me with the reverse psychologist saying that it's slightly flawed, but it doesn't leap out at me. Place Beyond the Pines, again, I'm drawing a blank. Obviously, I love Sound of Metal. I can't really picture what it's like. I don't even know, And then there's also, of course, the appeal of Mulholland Drive, which I've seen, and of course, I know the moments that I love. But I think, as Tony said, like it's been kind of solved. Like I feel like it could be just kind of another it's in the context. It's a dream of the. I mean, it's an amazing movie. Don't get me wrong. It's not my favorite. I have to say, it's not my absolute favorite Lynch, which makes me somewhat feel like, okay, should I give it another chance? And obviously, there's moments about it that I absolutely love. But I think I'm going to go Place Beyond the Pines because I think that is I literally just it's a blank to me. I have know nothing about it. I'd be going in completely blind. I guess you guys have seen it. We got some signs that it was liked, but I think it still could be an interesting discussion. And I think that's what my heart is telling me to go with this time.
Thanks, Connor. I'll just say I'm going to Disney World. That's all I'll say. It's been a great season. I'd like to thank my teammates, Travis Kelce, Patrick Mahomes, Jackson Mahomes. I know you're in jail, but I appreciate your support as well. No, I don't know. I think you'll have a strong reaction. So that in and of itself is worth something. I don't think anybody can come away from this movie saying, I'm totally right down the middle. So I think we'll have Tony on one side, we'll have Anthony on another, and Connor, you'll kind of be the mediator in the middle, maybe the deciding vote, perhaps. So excited for that. Thanks, Connor. And Anthony, take us away.
Yeah, I'll have what she's having.